My name is Cole Reeves, and I want to tell you something about silence. Most species interpret silence as submission. When a prisoner goes quiet, stops demanding, stops struggling, and simply sits in their cell and waits, every species I have ever encountered reads it the same way. They read it as a person who has accepted their situation, a person who has given up, a person who is no longer worth watching carefully. Humans are quiet when they are thinking. Those are two very different things, and the Vithori had no way to know that. I had been on the prison transport Valos for 9 days when I started the first part of my plan. Before those 9 days, I had spent every waking hour doing what most prisoners do, testing the cell door, measuring the walls, watching the guards, listening to everything, not frantically, quietly and systematically, the way you survey a broken relay system before you touch anything. Because understanding comes before action and rushing before understanding is how people fail. By day 4, I understood the cell. By day 6, I understood the guard rotation. By day 8, I understood the ship. On day 9, I went quiet. The Vithori guard assigned to my section was named Drac, and I knew that because the other guards called him by name, and I had been listening from the first hour. Drac was experienced and thorough and had clearly worked prison transport long enough to have seen every kind of prisoner there was. He checked my cell every 40 minutes in the first 3 days, every hour in the next 3. By day 8, he was checking every 2 hours and spending the time in between at the guard station, reading something on his tablet that made him laugh sometimes, which told me he was comfortable. Comfortable guards make assumptions. The first assumption Drac made was that my silence on day 9 meant I had finished adjusting to my situation and was ready to cooperate. The second assumption was that a human with no tools and no allies had no options worth worrying about. The third assumption, and the most important one, was that the maintenance access panel on the inner wall of my cell was too well secured to be interesting. It was not too well secured, it was secured to the standard Vithori specification for interior maintenance panels, which I knew because I had found the maintenance documentation on a public outer belt database 2 years ago during a contract job on a Vithori adjacent station, and had read it thoroughly because I read everything thoroughly. The specification called for a magnetic seal rated for Vithori strength tolerances. I am not Vithori, I am human, and human hands, it turns out, can apply torque at angles that Vithori hands cannot, because we have a wrist rotation range that does not appear in the Vithori Xenobiology assessment of our species. On day 9, during the 2-hour window between Drac's checks, I opened the maintenance panel. Inside was exactly what the documentation said would be there: a power junction, a ventilation relay, and a communications subnode that connected to the ship's internal network, but not the external network, but not the external network, which meant it was considered low security because it could not send signals off the ship. It could, however, communicate with every other internal node on the ship, including the ones in the 200 other cells on levels 2 through 5. I spent 4 hours on days 9 and 10 building something from the components inside that panel, carefully and quietly, replacing everything exactly as I found it after each session, so that the panel looked untouched. What I built was small and looked like nothing in particular, which was important, and it used the internal communication node in a way the Vithori engineers had not considered, which was a gap in their thinking that I was very grateful for. On day 11, I was ready. I waited for the rotation change, which happened at the same time every day because the Vithori ran a precise schedule, and during the 8-minute window when the outgoing guards had left and the incoming guards had not yet reached their positions, I activated what I had built. The internal communication node carried my signal to every cell on the ship simultaneously. What those 200 prisoners heard was a clear, calm voice explaining exactly 3 things. First, what was about to happen. Second, what was they needed to do. Third, how much time they had to do it. I had kept the instructions simple because simple instructions work across species barriers better than complicated ones, and I had no way to know who was in those cells or what languages they spoke or what their physical capabilities were. Simple was the only option that worked for everyone. What happened next took 4 minutes. 200 prisoners doing exactly one simple thing at exactly the same time is a force multiplier that no prison transport crew of 40 is built to handle, because the math does not work in the crew's favor no matter how well trained they are. The Vithori were well trained. The math still did not work for them. I will not describe the 4 minutes in detail because some things do not need to be described. What I will say is that it was controlled and it was precise, and nobody was seriously hurt on either side because I had been very specific in my instructions about what I wanted and what I did not want. Either Nad and the 200 people in those cells were all people who had been prisoners long enough to understand the difference between freedom and revenge, and which one actually got you ho. Me. When it was over, Drac was sitting in my cell and I was standing in the corridor outside it, and he was looking at me with the flat expression of someone who has just had their 3 assumptions corrected simultaneously. The panel, he said. The panel, I agreed. You opened it on day 9, he said. Day 9, I confirmed. You were quiet for 3 days before that, he said. I was thinking for 3 days before that, I said. I was thinking for 3 days before that, I said. He looked at me with those Vithoria eyes that were built for a wider spectrum than mine, and which I imagined were currently seeing me very differently than they had 2 hours ago. The wrist rotation, he said slowly, because he had clearly been working through the mechanics and had arrived at the answer. Our assessments say human wrist rotation is average. Your assessments measure rotation range in the standard plane, I said. Humans rotate in a secondary plane that your measurement protocol does not test for. He absorbed that. 9 days, he said. You learned all of this in 9 days. I was motivated. I said, the patrol vessel that responded to the distress beacon I sent from the bridge took 3 hours to arrive, and I spent those 3 hours making sure the 200 freed prisoners were in stable condition and the 40 Vithori crew were secured comfortably and the ship was running on a holding pattern that would not drift into anything problematic. When the patrol officers boarded, they found an orderly ship, a calm prisoner population, and 1 human standing at the bridge console who had clearly been busy. The senior officer who boarded was a Harathi named Sael, broad and steady with the dark eyes of the Eastern bloodlines, and she walked the ship for 30 minutes before she came to find me. She stood in the bridge doorway and looked at the console, and then at me. 1 human, she said. 1 human, I agreed. 9. Da, you said. 9 days, I said. 200 prisoners freed, she said. 40 crew secured, ship intact. No serious injuries. I had good instructions from the maintenance documentation, I said. She looked at me for a long moment with those dark eyes. The Vithori Transport Authority is going to want a full debrief, she said. I am happy to provide one, I said. They are also, she said carefully, going to want to understand how their interior maintenance panel specification was used to access their internal communications network. I imagine they will update the specification afterward, I said. I imagine they will, she said. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the console where I had been running the ship for 3 hours. Coal Reeves, she said. Yes, I said. The silence, she said. Days 6, 7, and 8. The guards reported you had submitted. I know, I said. You were planning, she said. Humans are quiet when we are thinking, I said. It looks the same from the outside. It is not the same from the inside. It is not the same from the inside. She held my gaze for a long moment, and then she turned and spoke into her calm, and the debrief process began, and I answered every question thoroughly and honestly because there was nothing I had done that I was not prepared to stand behind completely. The debrief took 4 hours. At the end, Sal walked me to the transfer bay and stopped at the door. The other prisoners, she said, you did not have to include them. I was already in the panel, I said. It cost nothing to reach 200 cells instead of 1. It cost you the element of surprise if any of them panicked, she said. Yes, I said. That was a risk, she said. 200 people had been in those cells for a long time, I said. Whatever they did with 4 minutes of instructions was going to be better than another day in there. I trusted that. She was quiet. You trusted 200 strangers, she said. I trusted that people who want to go home badly enough will follow a clear plan to get there, I said. That is not specific to any species. That is just people. She looked at me one more time with those dark eastern eyes, and whatever she had been calculating behind them reached its conclusion. The Harathi Patrol Authority, she said, has been attempting to locate this transport for 11 weeks. 47 of the prisoners aboard were Harathi citizens. I know, I said. I read the prisoner manifest on the bridge. You read the manifest, she said. I read everything, I said. She made a sound that was quiet and genuine, and that I thought, in another context, might have been the beginning of a laugh. Safe travels, Cole Reeves, she said. Safe travels, Commander, I said. I walked through the transfer bay and boarded the shuttle and watched the Valos grow small behind us through the viewport. And I thought about 9 days of silence, and 4 minutes of noise and 200 people who had wanted to go home badly enough to follow a plan from a stranger they had never met and would probably never meet again. That was the part I thought about longest. Not the panel, not the wrist rotation the assessments had missed. Not the communications node used in a way the engineers had not considered. Just 200 people who trusted a clear plan and a calm voice and the simple idea that going home was worth 4 minutes of effort. Humans had been trusting each other like that for a very long time. It had never once stopped working.